Hello guys, so finally continuing my style icon series. Today we're gonna talk about Elizabeth Taylor and her More is More style. I'm gonna leave the link on this series down below so you would check other videos. We're not only gonna talk about her style, we're also gonna talk about her body type, her bone structure, her flesh, her essence overall, and how this or that clothes looked on her. You don't have to know about my Kibbe series or Kibbe body type series. It's not as important because as we go along, I will explain you everything what we're talking about today. So Elizabeth Taylor is one of those types. Everything that she has is very much soft, small, and rounded. So this is how we can describe her body. She was quite petite. Her height was 1 meter 57 centimeters or 5'3". We can perceive her body as smallish if we see her arms and her legs in this particular part from the shoulder to her elbow, and her thighs, for example, it's shortened. It looks short, she looks small. She looks pretty soft at the same time, and we do perceive her as curvy woman. At the same time, we perceive her as pretty delicate too. Even though her bones are slightly on the wider side, in general her bones are not as wide and they're pretty delicate, but as far as she's shortened, any width of the bones is adding to that. So she has slightly wide bones if we compare her to her height. But anyway, she looks quite delicate. Her face looks quite delicate. She has pretty tiny nose. She has rounded facial features. We don't perceive her musculature. We perceive soft flesh on top of short and slightly wide bones. She had waspish waist. She had real hourglass figure, but we are not talking about hourglass or rectangular or apple shapes today. We're only talking about how we perceive her first of all. So we perceive her as small, pretty delicate, rounded, and soft woman. I found some pictures of her with Grace Kelly, and we normally don't compare one type to another because we look normally within one type. But sometimes when I find those pictures, I find it really interesting to just compare those two bodies in terms of proportions because it can give us a lot of information. For example, Grace Kelly, she is a classic by Kibbe. She has classic body type, which means moderate in everything, in face, in proportions, in the length of her arms and legs, in her overall length, and all other features of her body and of her face are pretty moderate, pretty evenly spaced, and pretty symmetrical. So if we place her with romantic, for example, softer to a softer woman, we can definitely see the difference. Of course, first thing that we see is height, but it's not the point because there are sometimes can be some romantics that are slightly taller than Elizabeth Taylor. We're mostly talking about the proportion within one body. So Elizabeth Taylor definitely looks within her body slightly shorter. She looks a little bit on a wider side, a little bit on a softer side, and more prominent, more voluptuous curves and more prominent facial features, however, still pretty delicate. And she has much more delicate top part here too. The line of her neck, which is going to her shoulders. Her shoulders are not very big, and her rib cage is also pretty narrow with a couple of tits on top. So this all gives us that more petite version of a body, more soft and more rounded. Not everybody knows, but she had pretty rare eye color. She had purple eye color. Some say purple, some say lavender color. Lavender is purple plus blue, like a mixture. So in a certain light, sometimes her eyes looked blue, but with some pinkishness to them. It's hard to explain, but it did have some kind of a purple tint to it, which was very, very interesting. And it's hard to see this on pictures because even colored pictures, they can't show the exact color, of course. Also, she had a very interesting mutation of her lashes. So she had two lash lines, actually, one above another. So she has very rich lashes. So every time she was going for auditions for the films, the directors of the movies asked her to wash off her makeup from her brows and from her eyelashes, just to see her face without any makeup. And she said, I don't have any makeup. So she had very rich black and very hairy brows, and also very rich lashes, very rich lash line naturally. She was definitely a style icon. I would describe her style more is more chic, probably. But I'm gonna see what you think about this when you finish watching this video, because it's very interesting how she played with textures, with colors, and with shapes. She was born in 1932 in London. Then she moved to America, to Hollywood, and she had an amazing career. She had 3 Oscars. She was the first actress who actually got $1 million for the movie Cleopatra. It was a very famous movie, but we get to it a bit later. As a child, she already started playing in movies. So we can see in the 40s, the fashion was pretty similar from one woman to another. Of course, it was a wartime. It was not a big fashion time. Everything got simpler. All the shapes got much more comfortable. There was not that much glam going on, I would say. So everything was kind of very simple. So we can see here that she doesn't have that makeup yet, that signature makeup yet. She has that pretty overplucked brows. We can see, as we can see in many 40s pictures, right? Shoulder pads. It was very popular in the 40s. So women would look more powerful, more overcoming losses of war. We can see pretty similar shirts and skirts if we compare her to other actresses of the same time. If we're looking at their casual style, we probably can see pretty similar things, right? We can see wider pants with a belt. Probably it would be high-waisted or mid-waisted pants. We could see some checked shirts, we can see some regular shirts. Her hair in the 40s was also pretty 40s. Slightly elongated, naturally done curls. It was not overly glamorized at that time. So women look pretty simple. Sometimes they could throw on some red lipstick just to pump up their look. We can see some childishness, some puffiness on her face. Now let's go to the 50s. It's very hard not to follow 50s style, especially if you are a star in the 50s. So of course we can see shorter hair, curl by curl, pretty glamorized look. With her makeup, nothing big was going on. Actually, it was pretty simple, as it was in the 50s. Basically eyeliner sometimes, or just lashes, red lipstick, and pretty intense brows. That's basically all she had at that time. Glamorized hair, of course, was done curl by curl. New look dresses became very popular in the 50s. That looked very organic on her figure. She looked amazing with waist emphasis, of course. It's interesting because her torso was pretty short and her waist was pretty high. If we look at her proportion from head to toe, we could see that her legs were a little bit longer. So the waist itself was already a little bit high and that torso was pretty small. So that space under tits to the waist was not very big. So if she would wear something with high waist, she would look like somebody's dressing her as a doll, like a woman is trying her daughter's dresses or something like that. So a woman who's trying to look like a little kid. So all the time she had mid-waisted pants or dresses. I never saw her with low-waisted, maybe a little bit later, closer to the 80s, but we're gonna talk about it. That waist emphasis, of course, played a wonderful role for her body because fabric should accommodate their curves. Otherwise, if the fabric is too stiff and too bulky, especially in that middle area, they look like they have that small, delicate head and then their neck, and then they have this balloon on the bottom, which can look a little bit bulky, especially if you don't open your wrists and your ankles. Just doesn't look delicate enough because they are smallish, so they look amazing with actually emphasizing their waist. Maybe her style was sometimes similar to Marilyn, but we don't have to forget that fashion industry only recently started overproducing stuff. We have so much clothes right now, so many kinds of clothes, kinds of fabrics and kind of textures. But at that time, it was pretty limited what you could buy in the shops. Fabrics were pretty good quality. There were many similar pieces of clothes at that time. For example, some jersey tops, skirts, pencil skirts, some belts, some suits. Of course, if we compare Marilyn Monroe, Elizabeth Taylor, or if we compare them to other Hollywood actresses at that time, of course we can find some similar pieces. Grace Kelly, for example. If you've seen my Grace Kelly style review videos, you probably remember that there are so many similar things that she could wear also. And it's funny because the majority of those pieces are the part of our basic wardrobe right now in 2021. But we're going to talk about it a bit later. It's a very interesting subject. The research for this series is giving me a lot of interesting data that I'm definitely going to share with you soon. Yeah, so in the 50s, she would probably play with brighter colors. So if we compare her to Marilyn Monroe, of course I'm gonna do another huge video about Marilyn Monroe. That's another very interesting and big subject. But if you compare those two, because both of them were pretty big stars in the 50s and both of them were carrying that genuine 50s essence 50s glam together. So that's what I could find, that maybe because of her bright coloration and being a little bit more on the experimenting point, I think Elizabeth Taylor would dare to go more for brighter colors, for more interesting shapes and patterns. When she was putting her hair on the back, it looked pretty nice because her facial bones were pretty delicate. If there's some volume in the hair at the same time, not very flat, so they look amazing with that. I could rarely see her doing that, but I think she looked very nice with that. In the 50s, I never seen her with bulky clothes, something big and unconstructed. So basically most of her clothes had waist emphasis. If we look at the suits were pretty classic. At that time, it was just very fashionable to wear those suits. You could buy them. The only matter that you had to take care of is how it sits on your particular body. So the size had to be pretty well tailored for your body. The shoulders, the sleeves had to sit on your body perfectly. The back had to sit on your body perfectly. This is why in the 50s, for example, in the 60s, people were really taking care about how it's shaped, how the clothes itself tailored and shaped, as opposed to nowadays when everything is kind of made so it would sit more or less good for everyone. If we talk about her casual outfits in the 50s, if we talk about, for example, separate pieces like a top and the bottom, of course, tops were slightly cropped. She had herself cropped torso. So if she would let her waist go lower, it would drag her body down a little bit to the ground. It would ground her. It would make her look a little bit heavier and bulky. It would make her legs look shorter. It would be dragging her down a little bit. So she knew that, she felt that probably. So all her suits, if we talk about suits, or top and skirt, or top and the bottom, it was pretty much cropped top part and elongated bottom part. Her dresses in the 50s were whether new look with a bigger skirt, or it was very classic narrow dresses, always having waist emphasis. One more basic wardrobe classic piece. We are seeing this black turtleneck actually in my every style review video, right? So I'm sure we're gonna see more of them. I could see her very often with wider pants. In the 50s though, the pants became more ladylike. The pants became more cropped sometimes, the waist became thinner, they started having the pleats, more rounded butt part, and then going narrower to the ankle, for example, or straight, but pretty often shortened, because in the 50s women were wearing high heels, so it looked so feminine. It kind of like was a skirt shape, but in terms of the pants. But if she was wearing pretty bulky and big pants, being so petite and being so feminine, then of course she had that waist emphasis, and of course she had that cropped top part. And this top part wasn't large, super big, and super exaggerated. So when it's presented that way, when the outfit is built that way, that the top is slightly smaller and the bottom is super huge and bulky, for example, even if you go for that on purpose, so our eyes looking at that slightly can't predict what's happening on the bottom of your body if the top is pretty small. You see, so those pants, if it's just one big element, one extra element of your look, it can even add some chic and some effortlessness to your look. It doesn't look like bulky piece. So that's an interesting thing, and you can use this. Now we go to the 60s. That's a big change, right? In my every video, I talk about this big change. From that glam, from that curl by curl, from that total femininity, we go to that geometric, provocative, very contrasted 60s. 60s is short dresses, no waist emphasis anymore, and she's romantic body type. I just wanted to remind you in case you forgot. So she started playing with shorter dresses. However, she would still, maybe she would go with no waist emphasis, but sometimes what's happening with romantics when they go totally without any waist emphasis, see, delicate part here, then there's a piece of clothes just hanging here, and then there are tits. Then the piece of clothes is lying on your tits, and then it goes down. If you don't do anything specific to bring this fabric again closer to your body underneath your tits, sometimes it is happening that it's hanging there on top and it's creating a lot of space underneath between your body and the fabric. So it's creating a new bulky shape for you. So this is why women who are curvy women, they sometimes have to think about their curves and how to accommodate how this or that fabric is gonna lie on their body, especially if this fabric is pretty stiff and if they're wearing something that is stiffly tailored. Sometimes it's necessary just to make it a little bit narrower underneath here. Not maybe too much, but just a little bit narrower, just to make the whole look overall more proportionate. And it's very interesting for me to watch all those women, all those style icons, how they incorporate their body, how they incorporate their style into the trends of that particular decade, because the decade is telling them what to do, like the list. Okay, we have the list, you are doing this, this, and this, and how they are playing with it and what they are actually adding or what they're not adding. I never saw Elizabeth Taylor do very extreme bold makeup, but she added smoky eye. If in the 50s she would more accentuate her top lid, then in the 60s she started doing that smoky eye, and I think that smoky eye gave her some additional chic to her face, because the color of her eyes, they were so light that this darkness around their eyes made them pop so much more and so beautifully, especially if the color of her eyes was lavender color between blue and purple, and imagine you are countering that around with something black or very, very dark gray color. I think that looked stunning on her. Another feature we have of the 60s is straight hair. Women stopped doing this curly hair, curl by curl, like in the 50s. Many of them started doing this very graphic bobs or elongated hair, but straight and with big volumes normally. And also hair bands. Yeah, it was very popular in the 60s. And Elizabeth Taylor started also doing this. She made her hair slightly longer sometimes, or if she had a bob, she still would have bigger volume, and she had pretty graphic hair, but again, it was pretty rounded. She did it pretty rounded, so it all looked very stunning on her, very cute. When these small women are doing huge volume, over the top volume that would be, I don't know, like half of her face, like if you measure from the hairline, so that would be a little bit too much sometimes. It's becoming sometimes too disproportionate. And if you remember, I did the SOPHIA LOREN Style review and we talked about that huge volume of the hair. I'm gonna leave the link down below in this video too, so you would check. It's very interesting how women who are pretty tall and curvy, like soft dramatics, they look amazing with huge volume and huge stiff volume. They're probably the only ones who don't look old-fashioned with that, so they can pull many of them can really pull that off, unlike other types. For example, if as far as Elizabeth Taylor, she was tiny, so that huge hair, like a little bit more than it probably should be, sometimes it could be a little bit too much for her in terms of proportions again. Now, in 1962, she made a very famous movie, Cleopatra. And as you know, in the 20th century, the archaeologists found a lot of Egyptian old things. It really influenced the style of women. Egyptian style is a very interesting thing. It's a very certain style. There was a lot of geometry in Egypt, both how they dressed and their hairstyles and their makeup too. So everything was kind of very geometric. What I loved about this movie, I recently watched it, of course I had to watch it. First of all, it's incredible artwork in terms of the fashion. You have to see this movie just to check that fashion art pieces. That is incredible. Everything that is made there is incredible. And she, as being this tiny and curvy woman, how you would ask how she would incorporate that very severe geometry. Would that make her too stocky? Actually not. I can just show you several things. The way they dressed her. Basically, pretty often it was waist emphasis. It was pretty graphic makeup, yes, but she has very dark coloration naturally. So that thing didn't bring any disharmony to her look. And in terms of volumes of the hair, of the makeup, and of the outfits, it wasn't that far from her own proportions. So within one body, she looked pretty good with that, especially that, see, in ancient Egypt, everything was exaggerated. You was not supposed to have a makeup that no makeup look or something. It was done on purpose. Those eyes unblended line on top and on the bottom and elongated here on the sides. It was done on purpose. Her black brows were exaggerated. It was done on purpose. And then that blue eyeshadow. And it's like a real historical pieces that they found. Elizabeth Taylor sometimes would grab those things from her Cleopatra movie, and she started adding that to her look sometimes. I'm not a big fan of that because I just think that it looks slightly too artificial, probably, like when you're lining your eyes with black and then you're putting blue eyeshadow right until your brows. Not a big fan of that, but you see, that was that time, and probably that being Cleopatra and playing Cleopatra and the way how much the movie influenced the people's fashion too. So I think she would do that from time to time. If we talk about her casual 60s style, it would be rounded collars, for example, or it would be v-neck jumper. Very, very basic thing right now, of course. White suits, for example, she would have a white suit. Sometimes she would have waist emphasis, sometimes there were no waist emphasis. Sometimes she started incorporating some elongated and pretty straight shapes. Sometimes she would make it cropped also, and that croppedness would compensate the bulkiness of the piece. Sometimes you just should compensate. If you have a little bit more here, you just do a little bit less there, and it kind of compensates in terms of the visual weight of the thing on your particular body, or where you want to accentuate, where you want to put the accents. If you opened her thin ankles, that of course looked very beautiful all the time. If she would go slightly heavier on the top, she could always open her ankles, her thin ankles, and show us that very delicate shoes on high heels. So you see, you're compensating when you're building your outfit. They did an experiment and they put blonde wig on her just for this photo set. Let me know, guys, what you think about this. I actually like it. I think that contrast, that purely white hair, looks great on her because she has a lot of contrast, and white hair, it does add contrast. If it's pale yellow hair that is somewhere at the same level as the tone of your skin, that will wash you out a little bit. And I found a couple of pictures of her when she got older, when she was trying that yellowish blonde on her. So I think this is when it really washes out their contrast, and especially it's for their and for their bone structure too. For their bone structure, they look amazing with overall hair color, which would be as contrasted. So her coloration was very contrasted, so something very contrasted would look amazing on her. But of course, I think it's slightly artificial. I think nothing can beat her black hair. Let's go to the 70s now. And 70s is the style of a hippie. It's we're going back to nature. We get rid of that graphic things. You actually can check this video. It's probably, if you like this type of series, you will love this video. It's in 2 parts. I really recommend you to watch that because I'm analyzing fashion in terms of the body structures and bone structure of women who is wearing that kind of a fashion, and about the history of fashion too of the 20th century, and which body type was connected to the style and to the shapes of the clothes that was very popular at that time. So you might find it very interesting, so I just recommend you to check that. So yeah, in the 70s we go more to the natural style, very relaxed style. We don't care about shape contrast that much. We get closer to nature. We pick up more natural colors, more natural shapes, more natural fabrics, more undone hair, less makeup. If we talk about Elizabeth Taylor, she started experimenting much more and much more. She started experimenting right after the 50s, I think, in the 60s, but in the 70s, she started really experimenting with a lot of different shapes, and I found her doing that gypsy style or boho style so often, which is very interesting. She would have this crazy hairstyles with some beads or some strange hats. She would put some stuff on her hair. She would have a lot of different kind of jewelry. She would have crazy patterns, kaftans, or there was a lot of colors, a lot of shimmers, so a lot of Eastern vibe, a lot of ethnical patterns as well. Sometimes she could have waist emphasis, sometimes not. So it was a different kind of a vibe that she was looking for, probably. She was very inspired by them. It wasn't that 50s glam anymore, of course. And it's very interesting, again, for me to do this research and seeing how that one woman can change so much throughout those decades, you know? Like, for now, we are looking at those 20th century famous women who already had the success, and we can observe how they looked throughout those decades, and nothing can beat probably 20th century if we talk about the changing of the fashion and the changing of the lines and silhouettes. It's so interesting to watch those women actually change their dressing philosophy completely, as if it's just another person. 80s. In the 80s, our huge shoulders are coming back, and guess how she's incorporating that into her look? Like that. She is making those dresses like a candy, but with these huge shoulders. That was very popular at that time, so she's making that. She's making that huge hair, combed hair. Of course, if we talk about romantics and their type of the body and their structure, proportion-wise, probably that is a little bit too much. But again, we're talking about Liz Taylor. She was like, more is more. She didn't care what people said. She would just play with this, which I think is just very cute. She literally could look like a cake. And approximately at that time, the front part of her hair became silver. And I remember at that time, it was not very popular to see somebody with that just partially silver hair, for example. And she left it and she really embraced it. So I just think many women, it was a good example for many women to embrace their silver hair, their gray hair when they started having those gray hair. If we talk about 80s suit, of course, it's a oversized, elongated suit without any waist emphasis with shoulder pads. What could be more opposite to romantic bone structure? But she did it. She did it. She used high heels, which helped, I think, because the delicacy of the shape of the high heels really helped to balance this. But you can see what was happening with the fashion at that time, and she didn't care. So she could wear short dress without any waist emphasis and huge hair. Again, doesn't help proportionately, but she would play with all those shapes over and over again. Now I just want to show you one example what's happening with the frame of a person. For example, when a person is really petite, then the width of a garment, a dress, for example, a piece of clothes, the width can compensate the height sometimes. So the wider you go in your clothes, the smaller you start looking. So when we see this red dress on her, the whole essence of a dress and the outline of a dress, the dress itself and the whole essence of the dress is so much romantic. It's great. It's bright. It's great for her coloration. It's very beautiful fabric. But this is what's happening when you're adding a little bit of the width, and this is what's happening when the height can't compensate the width anymore. Whichever high heels you would wear, probably that would not save the situation unless you would wear like probably these heels. But again, it would look pretty strange, I think, in terms of here, because she still had pretty short torso. If we talk about her shoes throughout those years, I could hardly see her in bulky shoes, in something pretty chunky and big, and I think the majority of her shoes was pretty delicate. And you can see the collection of her shoes. She had plenty of them. Some of the shoes were pretty weird and strange, so she loved playing with the shapes again. It would be high heels or smaller heels, or it would be just sandals or flat shoes. If we talk about her bags, I could hardly see her with that classic bag that Grace Kelly, for example, or Jane Birkin would wear. Her bags mostly were pretty cute, smallish, and very interesting in shape, and always slightly romantic, if I can say so. They were slightly, they're not angular, not funny, but they were more in a glamorous side. Now, jewelry. She had a huge collection of jewelry. She even had one of the most famous pearls in the world in her collection. It was called La Pellegrina. It was owned by several Spanish monarchs. Its history spans almost 500 years. The jewel is now in private ownership, and La Pellegrina is a Spanish word. It means the pilgrim woman, like female wanderer. The first reference about this pearl they could find was from 1539. Can you imagine? Yeah, it's a very old piece. And she even told a funny story that she was once in a hotel and she lost it. She was trying to find it everywhere. And then she could see her dog sitting and looking at her and having this pearl in his teeth. Also wanted to let you know that I created several boards in Pinterest for your inspiration. For example, if you go to my wardrobe for body types board, you will find 13 body types, and under romantic you will find the pieces that I found in the shops that are representing the style icon that I'm talking to you about in all of my videos. For example, after I've done the research about Elizabeth Taylor, I went through loads of nowadays shops with latest collections, and I was trying to find the pieces that would actually look like Elizabeth Taylor would wear. And I found so many. Actually, there are so many staple pieces nowadays. So I made a huge list. I leave the links on them down below under this video and in the comment section here too. And also you can go to my Pinterest boards. It's not necessarily that this certain piece of clothes would just look good on romantics or something, but I was trying to find overall combination between the shape, the fabric, and even the color, the combination of those that would really fit any romantic woman, any woman with this kind of a bone structure. But again, don't forget that we are building the outfit. It's not the piece of clothes. You can wear basically anything, but if you know how to style it around, if you know what to add and what not to add, that is the most important thing. All right, thank you so much for watching, guys. I will see you very soon. Bye. Subscribe on my Pinterest for 13 boards as an inspiration for the body types. Also, you can subscribe on my Instagram. All the links I'm gonna leave down below. Also, you can become my sponsor or subscribe on my Patreon for some exclusive videos, some early access to these videos, and just if you want to support me and my channel. Thank you so much, guys, and I'll see you very soon. Bye-bye.